Hey everyone, and welcome. My name's Aaron, and today we are looking at the KLON Centaur and a few of its counterparts. Before I talk too much, I just want to play through these four pedals. I've got the original KLON Centaur here on the far right. Next to it, I have the Anasounds Savage, which is my current KLON clone that I have on my board. Next to that, we have the Rockett Archer and the Wampler Tumnus. So some popular flavors in there as well as the original. And the way I wanted to do this is sort of like apples to apples here. So I'm actually going to put the knobs in the same spot. We've got gain, treble, and output on each one of these pedals. So I'm just going to run through them all on the same setting. And you can just listen and, come to your own conclusions. And then I'll talk a little bit about my impressions at the end of the video. And we'll start out with the gain at 9 o'clock and the treble and output at noon on all the pedals. Here's my clean tone. All right, now let's crank it up a little bit. We're going to go to noon on all knobs on all the pedals. right, now let's take the gain up to 3 o'clock and the treble to about 2, leaving the output the same. Another way a lot of people use their KLON is just as a boost with the gain all the way down. It's a parallel drive, so you can do that. So now we're going to turn the gain all the way down on the pedals, put the volume at about 3 o'clock, and the treble at noon. See what we get. And now let's try one of my favorite KLON settings, which is the gain barely on and the output and treble just below noon. And just so you know, this is a very subtle sound, sort of an always on kind of sound, barely different than the clean tone. But this is a setting that a lot of people will use the KLON for. So I encourage you to put on a pair of headphones if you have those to really hear the subtle, nuanced differences between these pedals. All right. So, hey, what do we think? What do you think? I would love to know what you think. Write down in the comments below what you think. If you like a certain one better, or if you can tell the difference even. Pretty interesting. I don't know if I was shocked by any, certain one of these pedals. I did like the sound of the KLON. It is what I thought it was, basically. I've heard a lot of the clones over the years, but haven't spent much time with a real one. I would say that they are all very close. The clones are all very close. They each are different, though. They have their own unique little characteristic, and I'll go into that maybe in a minute. But I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Like, hey, what did you like? Which one did you like? Which one didn't you like? What differences did you notice between the pedals? Again, this is like very subtle differences. I think when you crank the gain up, you can hear the differences more. When you're down at this setting that I ended with, you're getting so much of just the tone of the guitar and the amp that the pedal is just barely touching it with like a little bit of level, a little mid push. And so it's really hard to tell the difference at that low gain setting. And the ironic thing is that's where a lot of people run their KLON, is like at this sort of always on, just barely boosted, just gives it a little love kind of pushed sound into their amp. KLONs aren't really known for like, high gain. It's sort of this barely on, is it not on, transparent thing that just puts a little magic kind of into your tone. I think all of these pedals can do that, and probably most of the other clones out there. I haven't heard all of them, but most of them do a pretty good job of that. Again, if you love the sound coming out of your amp and you like your guitar, and this is just barely, affecting it a little bit, you're going to like the sound of the pedal. So I would say, getting into my opinion here, the original KLON definitely chops off the low end more than any of the clones. So I think that was one of the things, like when people started making clones of the KLON, they were like, oh, we're going to do a clone, but it's going to have more low end in it. And all three of these, I would say, have a little more low end than the KLON Centaur. It really does chop the low end, and I think you notice that more, as I said earlier, when you crank the gain up. So let me just do like all knobs at noon here, because I think that's a little more gainy kind of setting, a little more of the personality of the pedal is coming through. And let's just kind of listen, and I'll talk through it as we do it. I'm just going to play some sort of boring chords here. Here's the Centaur. So really focusing that mid-range, chopping off the top end and chopping off the low end. Here's the Savage. Doing the same thing basically as the Centaur, not as dramatic, I would say. The top's a little bit more open and the low end is a little more open. So maybe a little more transparent on the Savage. Let's hear the Archer. Also pretty close. Maybe the mid-range frequency is like a little different on the Archer. And the Tumnus. Okay, on the Tumnus, the thing I notice is the low end. That's really there, even more prominently probably than any of the other pedals. One thing I did find interesting was this sort of fizziness in the high end when you get to higher gain settings, and especially as you turn the treble up. These controls are sometimes maybe a little bit deceiving because really, when you turn the treble up, you're sort of turning up a different kind of gain. And when you turn the output up too, you're sort of turning up a different kind of gain. So think of them all as maybe different forms of gain that you're turning up within the pedal. I think that can help you shape tones with it. But I'm going to go to the Centaur here. I'm going to put the gain maybe a little past noon, the treble at about 2 o'clock, and the output at about noon. And if I play up high here, it's got this sort of fizzling out, angry, fizzy top end. Initially, I didn't hear that as much with the other pedals, but let's see. I don't know. Honestly, the more I play around with it, the more I feel like I could get the same sound on almost any of these pedals. These are subtle differences we're talking about. My takeaway here is there's not one pedal here that's like, oh, this is the bad one or whatever, or this is the good one necessarily. It's like, what do you like? What goes good into your amp? But honestly, there's nothing necessarily about the Centaur that I'm like, nothing does what that does exactly, because these pedals get really, really close. I would say personality-wise, the Centaur is aggressive in the mid-range. If anything, it has maybe a little more gain than the other pedals, where they stay a little more transparent. It chops the low end more than any of the other pedals. And it's got sex appeal, I guess. The Savage, I would say, is a little smoother overdrive characteristic. It didn't quite get like as chewy and as fizzy in the top end. It sort of smoothed that out. And it's a little bit more open in the top end and a little bit more open in the bottom end, but very close. The Archer had like this brightness, this different brightness in the mid-range, I would say, and not as much gain. That was my opinion of that. And then the Tumnus, it's just all about that low end, all about that bass. I would say it's probably the closest to the overdrive and the mid-range of the Centaur, but then they just add this big low end, which you may like or may not like, but that's probably the biggest difference. I'm trying to articulate like subtle differences, but I sort of hear different things every time I play, and depending on what I play and where I play and what pickup I'm on, I'm like, oh, that one's brighter. No, that one's brighter. That one's got more low end. No, that one's more like the KLON. No, I don't know. They're like different shades of the same color. That one's off-white, and this one's eggshell, and the other one's cream, and this one is like gray, white, and it probably goes without saying that the Centaur doesn't sound 10 times better than these pedals. We're talking about like a diminishing returns depending on, how big of a checkbook you have. If you need to have like a Centaur, hey, go grab one, whatever. They have great resale value, but it's like, it's splitting hairs to say that it sounds so much better. It doesn't sound so much better. There's less maybe top end in general. There's less low end in general. And there's a little more of a pushed sort of mid-range. There's actually more gain to it than I thought. It had more gain than I think the Archer and maybe the Savage too. Probably similar gain with the Tumnus. But there you have it. A KLON and 3 of its clones sort of compared and contrasted. I would love to hear your thoughts, or if you have a favorite. Obviously, there's like probably 100 different KLON clones out there, and you can go build your own or whatever, and a new company comes out with one every day. I would love to hear your opinion on what you heard today, and if you have any questions for me, I'd love to see those in the comments below. Thanks for watching today. That's going to be it from me, and we'll see you all next time.